There is a kind of pain that is invisible, a kind that doesn't show up on X-rays or hospital charts. It's not the kind of suffering that gets sympathy cards in the mail. No, this pain is deeper. It lives in the soul. It's the kind of pain that hides behind polite smiles and busy schedules. It's the kind of pain you carry when the world seems to have forgotten you. But I want you to know something today. God sees what others don't. In Genesis chapter 16, we meet a woman named Hagar. She wasn't a queen or a prophet. She wasn't someone people would write songs about or name cities after. She was a servant, an Egyptian maid, a woman used and mistreated, then cast aside. She found herself alone in a desert, pregnant, desperate, and heartbroken. She wasn't the chosen one in anyone's story. She was the forgotten one. But it was in that place of desperation that God met her. Not in a palace, not in a temple, in the wilderness. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the desert. And he asked her, "Where have you come from? And where are you going?" Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted her to voice her pain. And after hearing her story, he gave her a promise, a future, a blessing. And Hagar, overwhelmed by this encounter, said something remarkable. She called God by a name no one had used before. She said, "You are the God who sees me." In Hebrew, El Roi, friend. This is not just a story about an ancient woman in the Middle East. This is your story. This is my story. How many times have you found yourself in a spiritual wilderness, overlooked? You serve, but nobody sees you. You give, and no one gives back. You pour out your heart, and the silence echoes louder than the words ever did. People pass by. Friends stop calling. Even family doesn't notice the weight you're carrying. But God sees. He sees what others don't. He sees beyond the mask you wear in public. He sees the tears on your pillow, the ache in your chest, the battle in your mind. He sees every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer, every moment you've wanted to give up but didn't. God saw Hagar in the desert, and he sees you right now. We live in a world obsessed with visibility. Social media has trained us to believe that being seen by others equals value. That if people like your post, share your story, applaud your pain, then your suffering somehow matters more. But the truth is, some of the deepest works God does in us happen when no one else is looking, and that's okay because God is. You may feel like Hagar today, abandoned, misunderstood, walking through a desert season wondering if God even knows your name. But he does. He knows your name. He knows your story. He knows your struggle. And he calls you beloved. Think of David, a shepherd boy forgotten in the fields while his brother stood before the prophet Samuel. No one even thought to call him. But God said, man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. He saw David, just like he saw Hagar, just like he sees you. Sometimes the people closest to you won't understand your pain. Sometimes those you've helped the most won't even recognize your hurt. But your God is not blind to your suffering. He is not deaf to your cries. Psalm 39 says, "Oh, you have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when Isaiah sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar." He knows every detail of your life. Not a single tear has fallen without his notice. Not a single groan of your soul has escaped his ears. And when God sees, he doesn't just observe. He acts. He speaks, he moves. The same God who saw Hagar didn't just notice her. He gave her a future. He gave her a promise. And that's what he does for you. In the desert of your pain, he shows up, not with judgment, but with grace. Not with condemnation, but with compassion. So, when you feel like no one understands, when your prayers seem to bounce off the ceiling, when you're tempted to the lie that you don't matter, remember Hagar's words, "You are the God who sees me, El Roi, the one who looks beyond the surface, the one who finds us in the wilderness, the one who never forgets." There is a sound that cuts through the heavens like thunder. It's not the sound of applause. It's not the roar of the crowd or the noise of ambition. It is the cry of a child of God, a cry that comes not from the mouth, but from the heart. A cry that carries sorrow, desperation, and faith all at once. And the Bible says, God hears cry. Psalm 3:4-17 declares, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles." That verse is not poetic suggestion. It is divine truth. The Lord hears. not in some abstract, distant way, but intimately, immediately, and with perfect clarity. He hears every cry, every whisper, every groan of the soul, which was the chief. Many have cried out in secret, believing no one would hear. You may be among them. You've cried in the shower so no one would see, which was the chief. You've driven home in silence, gripping the wheel, trying to hold it together. You've sat in the pews of a church, smiling outwardly while screaming inwardly, crying, God, where are you? Do you hear me? Do you care? And though the heavens seemed silent, the truth remains. He has heard you every time. There is no such thing as a wasted cry when it is directed toward heaven. In Exodus chapter 3, when God called Moses from the burning bush, he said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. God was not indifferent to their bondage. He had not turned away. He had not grown weary of their cries. He said, I have come down to rescue them. What a picture of divine compassion. Not only does God hear, he responds. He moves. He acts on behalf of his people, and he still does today. Sometimes we think that God only hears the polished prayers, the ones full of scripture, the ones said in the right posture, at the right time, in the right setting. But the God of the Bible is not a God who waits for perfection. He responds to authenticity. Hannah's cry in 1 Samuel wasn't a structured prayer. It was a groaning too deep for words. The chief, she prayed in such anguish that the priest thought she was drunk. But God heard her cry, and in time gave her a son named Samuel. The cry of faith is not always loud, but it is always powerful. Sometimes it's not even vocal. Romans 8:26 tells us that. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Isn't that amazing? Even when you don't know what to say, when all you have is a sigh, a tear, a whisper, he hears. The Spirit takes your brokenness and translates it into heaven's language. There's a moment in the Gospels that echoes this truth in such a tender way. In Mark 10, a blind man named Bartimaeus sat by the roadside. When he heard that Jesus was passing by, he began to cry out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. The crowd told him to be quiet. They tried to silence his cry, but the more they tried, the louder he cried. And the Bible says something so powerful. Jesus stopped, the Son of God, walking with a crowd around him on his way to fulfill divine destiny. Stopped. Why? Because someone cried out. Your cry can stop God in his tracks, not because he's surprised, but because that's who he is. He is drawn to the desperate, to the hurting, to the ones who will not be silenced by the crowd. In Luke 18, Jesus tells the story of a persistent widow who kept coming to an unjust judge, crying out for justice. Though the judge didn't care about God or people, he eventually gave her what she asked for because of her persistence. And Jesus said, will God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? No, he won't. He hears the cry of his people. You might say, but I've been crying for so long. Why hasn't anything changed? And to that, I say, he still hears you. Delay does not mean denial. Silence is not absence. Sometimes the greatest God does are behind the curtain, out of view, preparing what you've asked for in a way you couldn't imagine. He hears every cry of surrender, every plea for strength, every whispered, help me in the middle of the night. And not only does he hear, he remembers. In Exodus 2:24 it says, a God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant. He has not forgotten his promise to you. The same God who heard the Israelites, who heard Hannah, who heard Bartimaeus, he hears you still. We live in an age of immediate gratification. If we want something, we can get it now. The click of a button, the swipe of a screen, and what once seemed like a distant dream is now at our fingertips. But God was the chief. God does not operate on our timetable. He is not bound by the urgency of the present moment. He moves the chief with a wisdom and timing that often seems incomprehensible to us. The waiting, the seasons of silence, delay, and uncertainty are not times when God is absent. They are times when God is working in ways we cannot yet see. When we are in the waiting, we feel as though time is slipping away. We wonder why nothing is happening, why our prayers feel unanswered, why our circumstances remain unchanged. It's in those moments that we are most tempted to doubt. Has God forgotten me? Has He moved on to someone else? Is my breakthrough coming? Or am I stuck here forever? But I want to remind you today that God is working in the waiting. In fact, some of the most profound spiritual growth and transformation happens not in the moments of immediate answers, but in the seasons of waiting. Think about the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. He said his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. But for years, decades even, Abraham and Sarah waited and waited and waited. There was no sign of the promise coming to pass. In fact, it seemed like everything was moving in the opposite direction. Sarah's womb was barren. She was well past childbearing age, and yet the promise was still there. God had not forgotten. He was not slow in keeping His word. His timing was perfect. In the midst of their waiting, there were moments of doubt. Sarah even laughed when she heard that she would have a child in her old age. But God's promise did not change, and in the fullness of time, Isaac was born. The waiting was not wasted. It was a time when God was preparing Abraham and Sarah for what He was about to do. Through their waiting, their faith was refined and their trust in God deepened. The Apostle Paul, too, faced seasons of waiting. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, he was eager to begin preaching the gospel. But for 3 years, he was in the wilderness, separated from the apostles, alone with God, learning, growing, and being prepared for the ministry ahead. He could have been frustrated by the silence, but instead he embraced the waiting, knowing that God was working in his life. And when the time was right, Paul's ministry exploded with power and impact. But it was in the waiting that God was shaping him, refining him, and preparing him for the call that would change the world. God's work in the waiting is often invisible to us, but it is no less real. We want instant answers, immediate solutions, and quick fixes. But God is not concerned with what we see in the moment. He is concerned with what we become. He is not just trying to deliver us from our circumstances, but to build our character, to strengthen our faith, was the chief, and to prepare us for the blessings He has in store. There are times when the waiting feels unbearable, when the promise seems distant, and the road ahead seems too long. It's in those times that we must remember that God is not passive. He is active. He is working in us, even when we don't see it. His word says, "The Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." 2 Peter 3:9. God's patience is a reflection of His love. He knows that if He gave us everything we wanted right now, we'd never learn to trust Him. We would never grow in faith. We would never experience the depth of His goodness and grace. But in the waiting, we are drawn closer to Him. Our hearts are refined. Our dependence on Him deepens. The wilderness, the season of waiting, is where God prepares us for the promised land. It's where He teaches to rely on Him alone. It's where He strips away the distractions, the self-reliance, and the false securities that we cling to. It's in the wilderness that we learn that God is enough. And just as God worked in the waiting for Abraham, Sarah, and Paul, He is working in the waiting for you. You may not see it now. You may not understand it now. But know this: God is never idle. He is never stagnant. He is at work in your life. The waiting is not punishment, it is preparation. He is molding you, shaping you, refining you. And when the time is right, when His perfect plan unfolds, you will see that the waiting was worth it. So, don't be discouraged by the delay. Don't lose heart when it seems like nothing is happening. Trust in God's timing. He knows what He is doing. He has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. The promise is still true, and His word will not return void. The waiting is part of His perfect plan, and in His time, He will bring everything to fruition. He is working in the waiting, and in that work, He is preparing you for something far greater than you could ever imagine. In the midst of chaos, in the depths of confusion, and in the wake of uncertainty, it is easy to feel as if the world is spinning out of control. We look around us and see the headlines, the conflicts, the suffering, and the turmoil. It feels as though everything is falling apart. It can make us wondering, is God still in control? Or perhaps you look at your own life, facing struggles that seem insurmountable. You cry out in pain and frustration, asking, why has this happened? Why doesn't God step in? But let me tell you today, friends, God is still in control. No matter how out of control things may seem in the world or in your personal life, God is sovereign. He holds the universe in His hands. He governs the heavens and the earth. His will cannot be thwarted, and His plans will never fail. In the darkest moments, in the most uncertain times, we must anchor ourselves in this truth, and God is in control. The Bible makes this clear from beginning to end. In Psalm 19, the Lord has established His throne in heaven, and His kingdom rules over all. God's rule is not limited by time, space, or circumstance. He is not subject to the whims of human power or the failures of mankind. His throne is established in heaven, and His kingdom reigns over all creation. There is nothing that escapes His notice. There is no force in the universe that can challenge His authority. We often forget this simple but profound truth when we face trials. We look at our problems, our circumstances, and we see them as insurmountable. We wonder if God has somehow lost His grip on the situation. We might ask, why would a good God allow this to happen? But the truth is, God is not the author of evil or suffering. The brokenness of the world is the result of sin and the choices of humanity. But even in the midst of that, God remains sovereign. He is working behind the scenes, bringing about His purposes in ways we may not fully understand at the moment. Take, for example, the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Joseph's life was marked by betrayal, injustice, and suffering. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, and thrown into prison. Yet through it all, God was in control. The circumstances of Joseph's life seemed out of control. He was at the mercy of others. But God had a plan. He was preparing Joseph for something greater. And in the fullness of time, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, where he would ultimately save many lives, including the lives of his own family. Joseph's famous words to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." The saving of many lives, Genesis 50:20, are a testament to the sovereignty of God. What others meant for evil, God used for good. Even in the midst of suffering, God was in control, working all things together for His purposes. This truth is not just for Joseph. It is for you too. Whatever you are facing today, whatever pain, hardship, or uncertainty, know that God is still in control. He has not abandoned you. He is not distant. He has a plan, and He is working it out, even when you cannot see it. His timing is perfect. His wisdom is beyond comprehension, and yet His love is unwavering. One of the most comforting truths about God's sovereignty is that He never loses control of the situation. When we are overwhelmed by the trials of life, it can feel like everything is spiraling out of control, but God is not shaken. He is not worried. He is not caught off guard. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His character does not change based on the circumstances. And because He is in control, we can trust that He is working everything together for our good. Romans 8:28 is a powerful reminder of this. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. All things, not just the good things, not just the easy things, but all things. God works in every situation, every difficulty, every trial, for the good of His children. He does not promise that we will be free from pain, but He does promise that He will use our pain for a greater purpose. Even when life feels out of control, God is still working, and He is working for your good. Think about the story of Job. Job's life was turned upside down. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family. He was left in a place of suffering that seemed beyond comprehension. Yet throughout the entire ordeal, Job never lost sight of one truth: God was still in control. Though he questioned and lamented, he ultimately declared, "Though He slay me, yet will I trust in Him." Job 13:15. Job's faith was not based on his circumstances, but on the unshakable reality that God was sovereign, even in the midst of his pain. God's sovereignty is not a distant, cold reality. It is a deeply personal truth. It means that God is in control of every detail of your life. He is guiding you, shaping you, and preparing you for what lies ahead. He is using even your struggles to refine your character, to strengthen your faith, and to bring you closer to Him. And was the chief, and when you come through the storm, you will find that God's hand was upon you all along, leading you, protecting you, and shaping you into the person He created you to be. When life seems chaotic and uncertain, remember that God is still in control. He has not lost His grip on the world or on your life. Trust in His sovereignty and know that He is working even when you cannot see the full picture. His plans are higher than our plans. His ways are greater than our ways. And no matter what we face, God will never relinquish control. His kingdom reigns forever, and nothing can ever change that. In a world where everything moves at lightning speed, waiting off He's the chief. Waiting often feels like an unbearable burden. We want what we want, and we want it now. Our culture has conditioned us to expect instant gratification. Whether it's the push of a button, the tap of a screen, or the quick delivery of our desires. But when it comes to God's will and His perfect plan for our lives, waiting is not just a reality, it is often the very means through which He shapes us. God's timing does not match our own. While we look at our circumstances with urgency, believing that the solution must come now, God sees the bigger picture. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end. He is never late. He is never early. He is always right on time. And this is where trust becomes crucial. Trusting in God's timing means surrendering our impatience, our plans, and our timelines to the one who holds time in His hands. From the very beginning, God's timing has been perfect. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we are reminded of this truth when it says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens." Ecclesiastes 3:1. Every moment of your life, every season, every waiting period has been ordained by God. There is no wasted time in His economy. Every day, every hour, and every minute is a gift, and each one plays a role in His perfect timing. This is hard to accept when our hearts are filled with impatience, but it is a vital truth. Consider the story of Abraham and Sarah once again. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but for many years, that promise seemed impossible. Sarah, his wife, was barren, and both of them were far beyond the age of childbearing. God had given a clear promise, but His timing was not immediate. Sarah, in her desperation, tried to take matters into her own hands by giving her servant Hagar to Abraham to have a child. Yet, in this act, Sarah discovered what we all eventually realize: our own timing is not perfect. The child that was born through Hagar did not fulfill God's promise. It was only when Sarah had given up all hope of having a child, when the situation seemed utterly impossible, that God fulfilled His promise in His perfect timing. At the age of 90, Sarah gave birth to Isaac. What she could never accomplish in her own strength, God accomplished in His time. God's timing was never wrong, and it was worth the wait. And many of us are like Sarah. We try to rush God's timing, thinking we know what is best. We feel as though waiting means we are stagnant or missing out. We look around at others and wonder why their prayers are answered faster, or why their lives seem to be moving forward while ours are in a season of delay. Yet God's timing is always purposeful. He does not delay to harm us, but to develop us. His purpose is always good, and His plan is always perfect. Think about the story of David. God anointed David to be king while he was still a young shepherd, but it was many years before David actually ascended to the throne. During that time, David endured betrayal, hardship, and uncertainty. He had opportunities to seize the crown for himself, to take matters into his own hands and force the timing of God's plan. But instead, and David chose to wait on God's timing, he trusted that God knew what He was doing, even when the circumstances seemed to be moving in the opposite direction. David's story is a powerful reminder that God's delay is not a denial. Just because you haven't received the answer or seen the fulfillment of a promise doesn't mean God has forgotten you. In the waiting, He is at work. He is refining your character, increasing your faith, and preparing you for what's ahead. It is in the waiting that we learn to trust in God's provision, to depend on His wisdom, and to find peace in His presence. The truth is, God's timing often doesn't make sense to us. We ask, why now? Why not sooner? We don't always understand His reasons, and there are moments when we feel frustrated by the waiting. But this is where trust comes in. We must learn to trust that God is not subject to our timeline. He does not rush because he is not bound by the constraints of time. What he begins, and he will finish it at just the right moment. The Bible tells us in Romans AG 28, and we know was the chief, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. This verse is a reminder that God is always at work behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. We might not understand why certain things are happening in our lives, but we can trust that God is working everything together for our good. His timing ensures that everything will fall into place according to his perfect plan. One of the most challenging aspects of trusting in God's timing is letting go of our own expectations. We often have a preconceived idea of how things should unfold. We want the answer to our prayer now, and when it doesn't come, we become discouraged. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. We cannot see what he sees, and we cannot understand what he is preparing for us. Yet when we trust in his timing, we acknowledge that his plan is far better than anything we could ever imagine. There will be times in your life when you feel as though the weight is unbearable, when the promises seem distant. And was the chief, and when the longing in your heart feels overwhelming, it is in those moments that trust is most needed. Trust that God is not silent, that he has not forgotten, and that he is working all things together for good. Trust that in his perfect timing, he will fulfill every promise he has made. So, as you wait, remember that God is not idle, he is not unconcerned. He is working in your life, and his timing is always perfect. When you surrender your impatience and place your trust in him, you will find peace, joy, and fulfillment in the waiting. Trust in his timing, for he is never late, and his plan is always worth the wait. In this journey of life, there are times when the path feels uncertain, when pain and sorrow seem overwhelming, and when we wonder if God is truly listening to our cries. Yet, through every trial, every waiting period, and every moment of uncertainty, we are reminded that God sees our pain and hears our cry. He is not distant or indifferent to our struggles. His eyes are upon us, and his heart is for us. We are called to leave it in God's hands, trusting that his plans for us are good, and that he is always at work, even when we cannot see it. God's sovereignty over all things means that he is in control, and nothing happens by accident. Though his timing may not always align with our own, we can trust that his timing is perfect and that his purposes are far greater than we could ever imagine. As we wait, we are being shaped, refined, and prepared for what lies ahead. God is working behind the scenes, bringing about his perfect plan for our lives. And in the process, he draws us closer to himself, deepening our faith, strengthening our trust, and teaching us to rely on his wisdom rather than our own. When life feels out of control and the waiting seems unbearable, let us hold firm to the truth that God is still in control. He is with us in every season, guiding us, protecting us, and leading us toward his perfect will. Our role is simply to trust him completely, to leave it with the chief, to leave it in his hands, and to wait patiently for his perfect timing. Remember, God sees your pain, he hears your cry, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Trust in his goodness, his sovereignty, and his perfect plan. And you will find peace that surpasses all understanding. Through every trial, God is faithful. Through every waiting period, he is working. And in his hands, we are safe, secure, and loved beyond measure.